What's up, folks, and welcome to Retro Ramble. So we're back in the shmup lands today, which is one of my favorite lands. Yes, indeed. And, well, I've got a really cool collection to show you guys today of three very iconic and quirky shmups from a developer who was known for such things. And it's also put together by one of the best porting houses in the business. When I think about my sort of S tier of developers who do modern retro collections well, the top three would be Digital Eclipse, Night Dive Studios, and M2. And the latter brought us this, and it definitely shows. I'm going to lay it out here up front. This collection is not cheap. It is an enthusiast collection that I think is priced accordingly. But if you're into this stuff like I am, I think you're going to find this quite compelling indeed. So yeah, Ray's Arcade Chronology, and this is, unfortunately, it's only out on the PlayStation and the Switch at time of writing. I know this was originally released in Japan, and the Xbox and the PC are not as big a thing there, but seriously, guys, you're leaving money on the table. I really think you should put these out everywhere, but I've been beating that drum for a while, so maybe one day I'll get through to them. So this is a collection of three Taito shmups from the 90s. So Rayforce from 1994, Raystorm from 1996, and Raycrisis from 1998. And Taito is a company that I have always thought doesn't get the respect they deserve in retro circles. They always march to the beat of their own drum. They put out a lot of games that were very different, at least within established conventions of genres. They put out games that were all very different, often very weird and goofy, but they all were very well crafted, and their ideas weren't just made for the sake of being different and weird. They were always done with a purpose. My recent video on Puzzle Bobble Everywhere demonstrates that spirit very much, I think, and that's on display here as well. And well, M2, I mean, they are one of the best in the business, and while this collection doesn't have as many features as some of their other ones have, this definitely has a lot in it. So as usual, I'm going to talk about what makes this collection interesting first, and then we'll go through each of the three games. If there's a particular game you want to see, or you just don't want all those feature talks, then check the description down below. There's chapters that you can skip to where you can go look at the part that you want. So as I said, there are three games in this series, and the second two, which are the two that are in 3D, actually have a pretty cool feature. So you can either play them in their original form, which is very much of the sort of PlayStation 1 era in terms of graphics. And, you know, you either like that or you're not as big a fan of it. But they also have what's called the Neo HD versions, which are the same games, but with much more smooth and up-res textures. I'm going to show you that first here, and then I'll show you the original so you can see the difference. These games play the same, they run the same, they just look different. And one of the things I love is that they kept the old version there for people who want it. If you want to play the game the way it was originally done, you know, in the most pure form, you have that option. But if you want something that looks a little bit better on modern displays, well, you have that option too, without affecting the core gameplay in any way, which I think is really nice. I think they did a good job with this, if I'm honest. So I'll show you this little sequence here, and so you can get an idea of what the new version looks like. And then let's go back to the original version, and you'll see the difference very quickly. It's quite evident. Yeah, there's that PS1 era jagginess going on. Now, these didn't run on PlayStation hardware, but it was very much that era of 3D where everything was very sort of chunky and, you know, had a lot of aliasing going on. So you can play either one of these. I've tried both. They both play fine, like I said, and again, I like that they gave people the option here. I think that's very cool, and shows that they have a respect and reverence for the source material. So, always like to see that. So let's talk about what else we got going on here. So, there is no rewind in these games, in the game modes themselves. There are in replays, but we'll talk about that later. So no rewind, it's kind of a bummer, but personally, I never really used that very much. I don't know if you guys did. Leave a comment down below if you're a fan of having the rewind feature in retro games. But you do have your quick save and your quick load. On the PlayStation, these games do have trophies, and almost all the trophies can be obtained by using quick save or quick load or other advantageous options. So this is not the easiest platinum in the world, but it won't be particularly hard either. So you have those options available. In terms of the settings, this is pretty awesome. So you can adjust in not all of the games support this option, but this one does. You can adjust the difficulty level on a per stage basis. So you can actually have certain levels be easier or harder as you progress through the game. I've never seen this before. I think this is super friggin' cool, especially if you're someone who's practicing for high score runs or speed runs. This is a great way to sort of focus, turn up the difficulty on the levels you want to get better at while easing yourself into the other ones. Really nice idea. I really like that. You can set how many lives you start with at the beginning of the game. If you don't use the default settings for these, there is a separate leaderboard for people who choose to mix with the settings. And then there's a leaderboard for people who play it in the sort of pure mode. So you have that option. You can still file in your scores if you're adjusting things. You can turn the attraction mode on and off as well as continues. If you want to get on the arcade leaderboard as opposed to the all mixed leaderboard, everything has to be done in 1 credit. If you continue, you get moved to the all mixed leaderboard. Arcade is for 1 credit only. There's an in-game guide, which I'll show you. You can change the language for that. You can turn on and off free play. You can just use a button to credit in if you don't want that. And then there's an option here where you can have an option to trigger your special attack in the games that support it by either a dedicated button or by pressing 2 other buttons simultaneously. It gives you the option to have that or not, which I think is kind of nice. The controls are fully rebindable, which I really, really like. You can even choose what side you play on, whether it's as player 1 or 2, and you can have 3 presets. And you can do that for each player. Really nice. A lot of games don't do this. Every game on console should have this kind of flexibility. Key rebinding should not just be a PC-only feature. I really like that. In terms of the display, you have what's called Fine, which I think is their idea of pixel perfect. Fit to screen, which sort of stretches it out a little bit to give you a little bit more room, and then full screen stretch if you're a filthy savage. You can turn smoothing on and off. The smoothing for me just looks like it puts a layer of Vaseline over the screen. I'm not a fan, but you can do it if you like. The scanline option, I think some people are going to find this disappointing. Other M2 collections and even some of the collections from Rodaleika and stuff give you a lot of flexibility with scanlines to really tune them the way you want for that proper retro feel. This is just on or off, and when they're on, they're pretty aggressive if you look at that. I don't personally use scan lines, but I know a lot of people really like them, and I think some people are not going to be too impressed with that. I've seen M2 do better on that. I wish they could have here. And then you can change your background if you want. There's 3 different ones, or you can turn it off. The backgrounds are actually nicely done. I think they're pretty cool, and I like that. And you have what's called the screen boundary effects, where, this basically just has, little effects around the edges that you can turn on or off if you like, which is kind of cool. And then you have this. Now, this is awesome, and you'll see this when we get into the game. The gadgets basically give you real-time telemetry information as you're playing about a whole bunch of different information. And it's really neat. Again, if you're someone who's practicing this competitively, this stuff can be invaluable. Or if you're just a stat nerd who likes to see numbers on the screen like me, this is really nice as well. It'll even show you what music's currently playing if you want. But some people are going to find this distracting. So you can turn all this on and off individually if you want. You can turn all of them off, or you can have just the ones that you want, which I think is really cool. It doesn't show those in the preview here unless you have a game actually going, which we don't. We're only in a track mode right now, so I'll show you that. Each game has different soundtracks you can choose from. You can adjust the music sound and menu volumes independently, which is really cool for an arcade game. You don't see that very often. And then I love this. Using authentic background noise, experience the game as if you were playing in the Tokyo Akihabara Hey arcade. It's actual background noise recorded from a specific famous arcade in Japan. I think that is so cool. I love it. I think that's great. I actually think it's cool. We're not going to use it here because it's it'll muddle the sound of the game itself, which I want you guys to hear, but that's just a lovely touch. I love that. And then you have here you can show your current ranking on the edges of the screen. You can suspend phoning into the leaderboards if you want. Not sure why you'd want to do that, but I'm sure there's a reason. What's weird about this is that so the game has, they call them achievements, even though the game is not on Xbox. But they do have achievements in this. If you're on the Switch doesn't have trophies or achievements, but it keeps the in-game ones for you. If you have this on PlayStation, the game will pop up its own trophy notification in addition to the PlayStation itself doing it. So that's a little weird, but you can turn it off if you want. This is a nice little thing that will turn off the auto rapid fire mode when you're in places like the continue countdown and leaderboard entry to make those easier for you. Nice little touch. There is also an autosave feature, but it's off by default because when it's turned on, it can pause the ROM very briefly, which means you could have cutting out of music and stuff like that. So that's kind of nice. A lot of good options in here. The screen options, I will say, for what I'm used to from M2, are a little bit lacking. You know, some of the M2 stuff, like their old Capcom arcade cabinet collection for the 360, just went absolutely bananas. They added in a whole bunch of options that no one was ever going to use. And they don't have those here. That's fine. But especially stuff like the scan lines and the inability to adjust the smoothing rate in that, that's not... They could have done better there, in my opinion. But overall, very well put together, far better than a lot of collections that I've seen, that's for sure. And of course, there are online leaderboards available. There's the arcade mode, which is sort of the pure ranking, as I've told you about before. As usual, a bunch of savants, you know, are at the top of it. Or there's all mix. This is the mode where if you use continues or modify the difficulty or anything like that, or use co-op, that's where these go as well. And you can filter it by the different ship types. And of course, when you go in here, you can hit a button, see your own ranking if you want. Very nice, well implemented. And yes, this does have full replays as well. I will show you that later, but it's a really nice system. You have the little achievement screen here, which shows everything. As I said, most of these are not too hard to get, especially if you're cheesing it. And then this I really like. Each game has a full manual. This is made by M2, and it goes into everything in exhaustive detail. The controls, the UI, the different power-ups, the different control options, the different ships, how you have to... the different ways you can attack enemies. It goes into great detail, but without being overly wordy. You can learn everything the game needs you to learn in like a minute of reading. And it even talks about the replays and the rankings and everything. Beautifully done. And you have these available in English or Japanese, and there is a different one for each of the 3 games in the pack. There's a zoom function if you want to be able to read things a little more closely, things like that. Love it. Very nicely done. Very cool. So, and then of course, when you start up, you have the option to pick from each of the different HD or non-HD modes for these 3D titles. The first one here, which is Rayforce, is only 2-dimensional. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so yeah, let's get into the games themselves. So first up is Rayforce, and this is a very interesting series because it started as a fairly simple, fairly bog standard shmup, I would say. But each iteration of this series, they brought a lot more to the table. You know, the first one, or the second game brought 3D to the table and amped up the gameplay mechanics some. And then the third game did even more of that and added some more really specialty things that were the kind of things you rarely saw anybody but Taito do. And we'll talk about that more later. So, this is the first one here. There's all those gadgets I told you about. Like, look at all the telemetry data it gives you. I love it. I think it's really cool. Like I said, some people I know are going to find that distracting, but I think it's really helpful. And especially if you're going for competition level play, this is a great thing to have on when you're practicing. Very, very handy in that respect. So, the key thing about the Ray series that made them different from other shmups is that, and you're seeing me do it here, in addition to shooting things that are on the same plane as your ship, which is pretty much the only thing you do in a lot of shmups, this has 2 different planes. So you have the enemies that are at your level, which you shoot in a fairly standard way, as you're seeing here. But in addition to that, you have the ability to lock on missiles to enemies that are flying on a plane below you. Or in some cases, if they're really large enemies, you can actually hit them with both types of weapons simultaneously. And so you not only have to manage enemies in 2 different locations and take them out with 2 different weapons, the lock-on gun is the only weapon that you can chain with. So And you can upgrade this. As you get upgrades for it throughout the course of the game, you can lock onto more targets. And the more targets you lock onto and destroy in a single volley, the more score you get. As you can see, each additional one you take out amps up the multiplier for that. So if you're playing to maximize your score, you really want to try to always have as big a chain built up as you can before you fire off your ground weapon. But depending on the situation you're in, you might not always be able to do that. Waiting too long may put you in a situation you can't recover from. So you have to sort of be cognizant of that as well. And you really have to sort of learn how to min-max it to get the most points while minimizing the risk to your character as much as possible. And as you can see here, we've got a boss creature here, and I have the ability to take out certain components of it using the lock-on and others using my standard gun. The enemies can also have bits broken off of them. You can either focus on their core, or you can try to take out their side parts first, which will not only weaken their attacks but also give you more score. So various different ways to play this, which I think is interesting. It allows you to take things in a different way, and it really adds replay value by allowing you to approach the games in different ways in different playthroughs, and to sort of figure out things in different and unique ways, which I really like. You know, a lot of shmups, even the good ones, are really just about memorization. And, you know, figure out the pattern, master it, done. And yeah, so is this one. You know, there is an optimal way to play this. And if you can figure that out, then, you know, you're going to have the best effect, I guess. But there's a lot of different ways to do this, and not necessarily one perfect path, depending on how you choose to stack up your attacks. And it feels like having to manage two different planes of attack at once would be difficult, but it really isn't once you get used to it. The game actually makes it quite intuitive. And I'll show you some more of that here. So, alright, next up is Raystorm, i.e. the first 3D game in the series. We'll go with the Neo HD versions for this here. And this one not only took the series into 3D, but it added some additional mechanics on top of it. So, as you can see here, this looks quite a bit different than the other game. But what's interesting about this one is that you have multiple ships with multiple different weapon types. You also have your typical air and ground attacks, but the interesting part is the first game didn't actually have a special attack. You know, like the equivalent of like a bomb, the screen clearer kind of thing. And this introduces that, but in typical Taito fashion, it does it in a unique way. So you see there, you have your special attack, and it's a meter at the top. So in a lot of games, you have bombs, right? And you have X many attacks that you can do per life, and sometimes additional bombs will be dropped as power-ups. And some games will reward you with a bonus at the end of the level if you have bombs remaining that you didn't use. This does things very differently. So when you start your life, you get one special attack, and then after you use it, it recharges by you killing more enemies, but it does so very slowly. If you die, you get another freebie, but if you want to not burn through your lives, you got to work for your next special. They don't just stack up. So you see, if I use this here, and the nice thing is the special attacks both air and ground units simultaneously, so it's not one or the other. You are truly going to be impacting everything on the screen. But as you can see, that meter is growing back pretty slowly. So the game does not hand them out to you sort of willy-nilly. It makes you work for them. Unless you want to sacrifice a life to get, you know, another kick at the special can, which in certain strategies there can be arguments to be made that losing a life in order to get a special back in a strategic fashion is a smart move. But if you're trying not to do that and you want to try to stay alive, just stay alive as long as you can, well, you got to watch it. You got to really make sure you only use your special at very particular opportune times, and you got to understand that you're going to be waiting a while for it to come back. Again, a very different way of doing it, and I think it's cool. I think it's a neat system. I think a lot of people who are into traditional shmups are probably going to find it a little stingy and a little frustrating, but I like it because it's different, because it breaks the mold. You know, a lot of, as I said before, a lot of even really great shmups are fairly formulaic and fairly samey in their base ideas. You know, they may have a little tweak here and there, or interesting level designs, or interesting art, or something like that. But a lot of shmups at the end of the day are really variations on a fairly simple base theme. These were not. These were all very different, and they all iterated beyond that to do things that were outside the norm and tried to break the mold, but also did it in a very good way. Like I said off the top, Taito did a lot of things their own way, and despite the fact that they were never a massive company and that they were always fairly niche compared to a lot of the industry, they never focused on things that were more mainstream and safe, I guess you'd say, than a lot of other Japanese developers did. They did a lot of things that were weird and different, and in some cases rather expensive. You know, another series of theirs I really like is Darius, and the Darius games, I mean, there's a Darius arcade cabinet that had like 4 monitors in it, side by side, to give you this extra ultra-wide playfield. In fact, if you buy Darius Burst Chronicle Saviors on PC, it will actually let you do that if you have the equipment for it. You know, a really weird, really expensive thing that was really off the wall and a risky investment for arcade owners, but they did it, and they're famous for it. Those games are very well regarded because they were so weird and different, and people remember them because they were different. And this series is very similar. I don't think Taito gets a lot of the historical respect they deserve sometimes, because they put out a lot of samey games as well, but the things they did that were different were really different. And again, not done for the sake of being different, but because they had a vision and they wanted to do something cool and unique, and not just make it different, but make it good and different. And that's what they did with these. And I always thought they deserved a little bit more historical kudos than they got for that. But they're really, this is one of those. This doesn't play like another shmup, but it's not inaccessible. That's the thing. It's very easy to learn and understand what this game expects of you and what you have to do. So even if you're someone who is not typically into this genre and doesn't have a lot of experience with it, you're not going to be sitting here confused going, what do I do here? I don't get it. You know, and that's what I really, really like. So, all right, so here's the big kahuna. This one is crazy. So as you can see here, this has, they have little explanations here on each one, but check out Raycrisis. The third and final entry in the Ray series, using the GNet system, which we'll talk about. This vertical shooter could save player data and updated in-game content with each play. The largest game in the series with 42 maps and 3 endings. Yeah. You could replay this one a lot if you wanted to. It does have a story. It's a shmup story. It's borderline impenetrable. I wouldn't even say borderline, to be honest with you. But it adds a lot of replay value. And this GNet system is really cool. So, it's not a save game. That's not what it is. But it's almost like a weird loyalty program. And I'll show you what I mean by that. It is something very interesting indeed. So as you can see, it's 3D again, but they've turned the visuals up even faster. It gets pretty nuts in here, and it also introduces this encroachment mechanic that you're seeing flash on the screen there, and we'll talk about that as well. So yeah, this is very Japanese. It's very like in your face kind of crazy visual style, but it's, you know, you can't say it ain't flashy and that this wouldn't attract you if you saw it, right? So here's how this works, and this is so neat. So what this has is a system in it. It's based on your profile name, which is really just the like equivalent of how you'd sign in, you know, put your initials in for the leaderboards or something. So you could cheese this if everybody you knew used the same initials, right? But if it recognizes a prior code that you put in, it'll give you a new map type that you can play if you want, or you can play your old one. And the more you play the game, the more content it unlocks. And it's not I guess you could kind of call it a microtransaction, and that obviously you'd have to play the game more often to see everything, I guess, and thus put more quarters into it. But it actually rewarded people who put time into the game with new ways to play it. I think that's so cool. That didn't happen in arcades, basically ever. And it's a neat system because it didn't require any special, you know, memory card or ID badge or anything. It was just tied to your initials. That's all it was. And unless you had two people who tried to sign in with the same thing who didn't know each other, which was unlikely, you kind of had your own little tailored experience with this. Such a cool idea. You know, the Neo Geo platform was kind of famous for accepting memory cards. So if you were one of the crazy people who owned the home machine or just wanted to save your progress in the arcades, you could actually take a memory card with save games on it, and it would work in both the arcade cabinet and the home system, which was or allowed you to resume a game on future system, you know, multiple different arcade machines. Really cool idea. It never really took off because it required buying extra hardware. But this wasn't that. This doesn't save your progress. It just remembers how much you played the game and rewards you for playing it more. Really neat, you know, and very much one of those weird, you know, hashtag just Taito things, you know, that kind of idea. Really, really smart and really innovative. And one of the things that made this stand out, you know, before this, oh, hey, look, I unlocked a trophy. Neat. I played this game before, but only the PlayStation 1 version. And it was very interesting to see all these additional features and stuff that they added into this version of it. And just as you can see in general here as we go along with this, like this clearly, you know, turn the craziness and the visual flair, you know, up to 11 compared to even the second game. And you can really see how this series evolved. You know, there are other shmup series out there that did some interesting things with their sequels, but were also fairly safe, and the games all seemed like just very small iterations on each other. These were almost complete reinventions in some cases with each new iteration. And again, that's why what I loved about this, and this is why I often think Taito doesn't get the historical respect they maybe deserve, because of the crazy things they did and the crazy risks they took, even though they knew it was niche and even though they weren't that big a company compared to some of their competition. I really respect that a lot, and it's a cool thing. And the other thing this game added, which I haven't even really talked about yet, is that encroachment mechanic. So effectively what you're trying to do here is to stave off an invasion, and that encroachment meter will keep going up, but the more enemies you kill rapidly, the more you can hold it back, and even reverse it a little bit at times. If that actually gets to 100%, you get immediately thrust into a fight with the final boss, and depending on what you do there, gets you one of the different endings. Cool idea, but and I did it just to see what happens, but it's probably, if you want to get the value out of your quarter, then that's probably not the way you'd want to do it. But again, new idea, something rarely ever seen before, and it works. It really does. And if you want to put the time into this, this game has a huge amount of different levels. You can experience them all in one go, and 3 different endings if you want. One of which is, if you didn't know, would be hard to find. Just so many things that are different and interesting. And that's the thing. I think these are definitely hardcore shmups, and as I said, this is not a cheap collection. Most of the stuff that M2 puts out, including their excellent Shot Triggers games, are not cheap. They're very expensive, and they're sort of targeted at a hardcore audience, but they're made with love and passion by people who clearly love what they're making, and they include a lot of features that, you know, at that price tag, hardcore players, I think, have every right to demand, and that's very, very good. The flip side of that, though, is that shmups are having a little bit of a comeback lately, especially in the indie space. And I love to see that. Like, I'm bad at shmups. I'm not good at this genre because I don't spend enough time with any one game to get good at it. But I love this genre. I have over 200 shmups on Steam alone. You know, I love this stuff. I think it's great. And it's having a little bit of a revival, but it's still very niche because I think a lot of people who never played this genre and don't understand its appeal, if you put them down in front of a couple of games like this, they'll probably get it and be like, oh, I see why this is cool. I see why people like this. But they're not going to spend this kind of money to take that chance. They're not going to buy a collection of 3 games, you know, 3 excellent games with a lot of features, but nonetheless 3 games for this price and risk not liking it and feeling like they wasted their money. And they got to... I understand that to make collections of this caliber is not inexpensive, and that they have to get their money back, and clearly, because M2 keeps making these things, clearly selling them at this price allows them to make the money to keep making more of it, and that's good. But I really think if they were able to find a way to do these a little bit cheaper, even a little bit cheaper, they might be able to get some more people into the shmup world. And I think this is a genre that, you know, it basically died out when arcades died out, but now it's started to have a bit of a comeback. And I really think this is the golden opportunity to bring new people in and to really get people invested in this genre and to kind of boost the cause, if you will, you know? And yeah, I wish they could find a way to make these packs just a little bit cheaper, and so they could be more palatable as an impulse buy to casual players. Because I do think this is amazing. I think this pack is great. I think these games are great. I'm going to play a lot more of this. But if somebody said, wow, that looks cool, maybe I'll pick it up on my Switch, how much is it? And I told them, they'd be like, a lot of people would be like, what? I could get a lot more in terms of content and hours of playability for a lot less. And they're not wrong. You know, if you're a hardcore fan of shmups, and especially if you want to do competitive level stuff, then you're not going to care about this price because you're going to put in the time, right? You're absolutely going to put in the time to this, and you'll get all the hours you could ever want out of this collection. But if you're someone who might be into this genre but doesn't want to take that kind of financial risk, there's the problem, right? And it's a bit of a catch-22, I know, but I think somebody needs to pull the trigger on that to make it a little easier. So here's the replay gallery I was telling you about. It'll save your local playthroughs automatically, which is kind of cool. Or if you go into the online leaderboards, you can download any score you want, which is really, really cool. And actually, I think my download is over in Raycrisis. Yeah, so I downloaded the top player in the world. And this is great because the replays download super fast, and it allows you to not only see that somebody didn't cheat, but it allows you to watch some god tier play. And I just love this. I think this stuff is fascinating. It's so cool. And even the replayer is nice. Like, look at the bottom, it gives you telemetry information. It shows you in real time what the player's button inputs were. If you're trying to play competitively, that's very valuable information. You can fast forward, you can rewind, you can speed up and down. It shows the amount of time they played. Again, good for speedrunners. You know, you really get a lot of options here to do all kinds of interesting things. So you can slow things right down. If you want to really watch some frame perfect play and figure out what somebody did, it gives you that option. Really nice. I like that. And it's very, it's very responsive, and it does a great job. I think it's a great system. I know this is not super easy to implement, but I wish basically every shmup had that, because it makes it so much easier to learn what the high level, what high level play looks like, and how you can get good enough yourself to pull that stuff off. So yeah, anyway, I've repeated myself a bit here, and this video's already gotten quite long, but I do think this is a great collection. I think value is always subjective, but if you're someone who might like shmups, but you want to play things that are a bit different, this is a great collection to check out. So is the famous Ikaruga, which is out on basically every platform now. That's another game that did things very much its own way and is beloved for it. I think in some ways this can hold toe-to-toe with that in terms of gameplay innovation, but it hasn't necessarily. And if you are a hardcore shmup fan, if you've never experienced this series, what are you doing? This is basically the best way to play it. I highly recommend that. Yeah, you could go through the hassle of setting up an emulator and, you know, running it that way if you want. I'm not going to say you're wrong for doing that, but if you want to play these games not only legally but in a way that adds a lot of great quality of life improvements and stuff for competition level players that emulators don't have out of the box, then this could be compelling in that regard too. If you want a shmup to really focus on and try to, you know, get good at, that is very challenging but doesn't really feel unfair very often, this is great for that too. So I do recommend it. It'll cost you, but I think you could do a lot worse for the money than you get here. I think this is very well made by people who clearly love what they're making. So yes, indeed, that is Ray's Arcade Chronology. It is out now for PlayStation and Switch. Maybe one day we'll see it on other platforms too. You know, very similar to the pricing. Put this in more places, you get more people into the cause, is all I'm saying. But hopefully we see that at some point. But thank you guys very much for watching. I do very much appreciate it. If you like what you saw here, please do all the normal YouTube things. Those do help the channel out a great deal. Leave a comment down below. Tell me, you know, does this collection look cool to you? Are you a hardcore shmup enthusiast or sort of a newcomer? Do you think the price is worth it for what's on offer, or is it a little bit too much? If you're not that into it, what other collections are out there that maybe it would interest you or that you have played? I'd love to hear about those too. And as always, you can follow me over at twitch.tv/pxabstraction for multiple variety streams a week. I cover indie games over there as well as other retro stuff, including a lot of games that are best suited to streaming than YouTube. We have a fantastic community there, and I would love to see you be a part of it. Thanks again all, and I'll see you in the next one. You folks have yourselves a good one. Take her easy.